Welcome back, everyone. Awesome. So we just had our first session of the day, and we're getting ready for the second session of today. We have with us Gaston Cruz, who is a data platform MVP, and he's going to talk us through options to refresh our tabular models. So that should be interesting. And hopefully we'll get this one like flawlessly, not like the first talk, which was a little bit of a hiccup, and we'll have a little bit more time for the Q&A this time around. So please get your questions in on the live chat on the, I don't know, it's to either one of the sides, I'm not entirely sure. And you'll catch JT and me in the chat, and we'll guide you through. So enjoy. Take it away, Gaston.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. Okay, my name is Gaston Cruz. I'm gonna share my screen right now. Perfect. And this is going to be a session where I'm gonna switch between PowerPoints and live demo, because I always love to see some demo in live action and to understand exactly what's going on behind the scenes and what service you're using and how you create those services, and step by step how we can do this. Okay, actually, this is going to be my session of the options to refresh our tabular models. I learned this directly in different projects working with clients. Moving forward, my name is Gaston Cruz. I'm working right now as a solution principal with Slalom company. We just received the Partner of the Year award in Power BI Global. And I always say I am another Uruguayan lost in the world, because I moved with my family from Uruguay, South America, 1 year ago to States. And right now I'm working with different clients, different industry, all in the data platform world, basically all Azure data services, data factory, data lake, Synapse right now, that is hot topic everywhere, and Power BI, or mostly premium data capacity. And I've been talking a lot about kind of new features that's going on right now in the Power BI premium side. Thanks for the product team working on that. And we should celebrate the 5 years for Power BI. So that was last week. Let's move forward with our topic today. We are going to focus on talking about architectures in tabular models, how we process the first manual process of tabular model. Then we are going to jump into the what's going on of logic apps, what we can do with logic apps regarding tabular models. And then we are going to switch to another service that's called Azure Data Factory, and how we can actually use Data Factory with our tabular models. And then we are going to round up and to some Q&A questions from the audience. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the architecture here, and we can start looking at different services and how we are going to combine those services in our solution. So one of the main deal here is one service that we've been using for tabular models in Azure. The name is Azure Analysis Services. And for those that they used to work with semantic layers, multi-dimensional models and tabular models, there's a service that right now the data engine itself has like 20 years. The name is SQL Analysis Services, and that engine provides us to work with semantic layers in an on-premise environment. So in the old school, you used to have, and let's start jumping into different places here. In the old school, you have SQL Management Studio, and you can connect with an on-premises analysis service. You can use the local host or the name of your server here and connect directly to your semantic layer. Even if you are using SQL Analysis Services, that is the way you connect directly to see all the data models that you have in an on-premises database. So you can see all the models and the tables, the connections, the roles, the partitions, everything. Right now in the Azure world, you have exactly the same, but you will have an instance of Azure Analysis Services. That is the one that you can create directly in the Azure portal. And let's switch to that. Let's see my Azure portal here. And you can see that I have my Azure portal, and inside my Azure portal, I have my analysis services. You can see here the name of the analysis services, and you have different models that I have in that server. To see all the models that I have in that server, I can jump into the SQL Management Studio, and you can see that I have the server name here that I can copy and paste from here, and I can go to my SQL Management Studio, go to the connection here, just paste that URL to access my server, give the authentication to that server, and I can connect to that server, and I can see all my databases that I have in that server. And I can open the databases here, all my data models. I can see the connections, the tables. In this case, my data model is pulling data from an Azure SQL database. That's why I have this connection here. And I have all the tables coming here, all my roles coming here. And if we are talking about a data model in Azure Analysis Services that has millions of rows in the data model itself, you need to provide partitions. That is kind of a best practice to process a model, because you don't want to process all your sales from the last 20 years. You want to process eventually the last 2 months or the last month of information, instead of processing millions of rows every time you need to process the model. That's why we came with the partitions, and you can see that if I have to open a sales order detail here, I can go to partitions and I can see all the partitions. In this case, I have only one partition because I don't have too many rows in that partitions. But if I have a sales data model, I will have a lot of partitions, partitions for January, February, March, and so on. You can eventually create different partition strategy for your company. So that being said, you can actually create your data model, and the way I deploy the data model to this instance of Azure Analysis Services is using SQL Data Tools. So SQL Data Tools is the environment to create data models. So if I open, and this is a tool that I use all the time, the Visual Studio Data Tools is an open, you can go and standalone installation and download that instance of Visual Studio, and you can provide with this window here where you can open your data model deployment, and you can see that I have in my Visual Studio here an environment where I can see that data model that I show you in SQL Management Studio, and everything that happens in that solution that allow me to deploy not only the data model itself. I can get more data, more tables, more views to the data model. In this case, I have my data source here. This is my connection to my SQL. If I need to create or import new tables, I can right-click and import new tables to that data model, or I can create, in this case, I am gathering the information to this database. And you can see that in my case, I'm using a database connection to that Azure SQL database, and I can see all the tables coming and all the views coming into this navigator, where I can just click on any table or any view and still add more tables or more views to my data model. Even if I go to my transform data here in Visual Studio, I can still add more data, and this is just for all of our audience that they are working on Power BI. You can see that the information is coming directly from that Azure SQL database, and the name of this window looks familiar for all of us because this name is Power Query Editor. So everything that you can run in Power BI Desktop in terms of Power Query, you can just see here that I have my advanced editor, and this code is exactly the Power Query Editor that I have in Power BI Desktop. So you can still working in an enterprise semantic layer, working directly in Visual Studio, and creating your data model directly in Visual Studio, kind of the same way you create your data model in Power BI Desktop. So that being said, you can see in my window here that I have all my measures, and the measures itself you can see in the top of the window here. And let me grab some kind of editing tools to show you that actually what you can do here is, in this statement here, I'm using just the DAX language. And same happens here, where I can summarize the total quantity for the sales order detail. So what I'm saying here is all the relationships and the data model processing and everything is kind of similar the way we used to do things in Power BI Desktop. So when we finish with the model from this window in Visual Studio Data Tools, you just go to your solution, right-click in your solution, and in the properties, you define where you're gonna reference this data model. So you can say, okay, I want to create a new data model in my instance of Azure Analysis Services, and I can actually go to the server, and let's go again to my Management Studio, and I can say, okay, I want to grab this URL of the Azure Analysis Service instance, just copy the URL of my server, and paste that URL directly in my deployment process in the Visual Studio Data Tools. That is the kind of the process that you use to do when I want to deploy from here, from Visual Studio Data Tools, a data model to Azure Analysis Services. That is kind of the process, and this is not the main topic of our session today, but I want to kind of synchronize with everyone in the audience to see what is the process behind the scenes to create an enterprise data model from Visual Studio to Azure Analysis Services. But then the next step is going to be, okay, my data team, and you can see that my deployment method just deploy the data model to Azure Analysis Services. And if I go to my SQL Management Studio and hit the refresh option here, I'm going to see another database right now because I just deploy a new data model. And you can see here that I have a new data model and I have the connection and the tables coming to this data model. But when I deploy from Visual Studio, what I deploy directly is only the metadata, the schema of that model. The information from the Azure SQL database is not coming directly to the data model. So if someone is using Power BI Desktop and is connecting to this data model, it's not going to show for that person anything because the data is not there yet. If we need to process the model, if we need to sync the information coming to the Azure Analysis Services, in this case from Azure SQL database, we need to process the model. And we can have different options to process the model, because at the end of the day, what is the most important thing? To leverage to the business user all the information that they have, and they need to create new reports and make decisions based on that information. That is the most important things for all of us in the data platform world. So in this scenario, to understand how we can show the right information and the latest information for the end user, we need to go to each table here. And even I can do that for the database. I can go here and let's say that I want to refresh or sync with the latest data for one partition of one table. I can right click here, go to partitions. And in my case, I have one partition and never process that partition. So I can go to this option here and I can process the partition. Let's say that I want to process for that partition, and I can see that now we are processing all the data coming to the entity of address, and I get 450 rows coming from Azure SQL database. The same approach I should be doing with each of these tables here. I should be right-clicking each of them, go to, in this case, I'm going to process not just the partition, I'm going to process the whole table, and I can right-click, process table, and I can switch to process for, and I can get the process of that table. And the same that I can do with the whole database. I can right-click in the database here, in the name of my data model, and I can process the whole database. So every time I need to sync with the latest data, I need to process that table or that partition or the whole database. That is the way I can be sure that the business user is getting the latest information when they create a new Power BI report. Or anyone, maybe we have business user that they are handling data analytics from Excel, and they are creating pivot table from Excel, and they are connecting to these tabular models. So we have to be sure that we are bringing the latest information in the data model. So what we see until now, we see how is the manual process of the data models in Azure Analysis Services. Now, we will be bringing a way where we don't care about the refresh. We just create a whole solution that take care from us all the process of each table, each partition, or the whole database. This process that we are going to talk about is going to process the whole data model and bringing the latest version or the latest information coming from the data source to the data model. So every time we can say every time, every day at 6 a.m., the process of the model is going to run and trigger automatically. So every time a business user start the business day, we are sure that they are going to see the latest information coming from the Azure SQL database. So let's jump into the slide. And we can see that we have here 3 or 4 different components. One of the components that I already mentioned is this one, the Azure Analysis Services instance. And that instance of Azure Analysis Services where we deploy the data model has a REST API. So that instance and Microsoft is sharing with us the REST API of Azure Analysis Services. So we will be using the REST API behind the scenes to connect and to refresh or process the data model using Logic Apps. Logic Apps is going to bring us the power to process the data model, to process any table, any partitions, or the whole database. And then we are going to trigger the whole solution directly in Azure Data Factory. Azure Data Factory is going to be the one that calls the Logic Apps to process the data model that lives in Azure Analysis Services. And all of this, we can bring all this architecture directly in Azure DevOps if we need to process the pipeline automatically from different environments. If we can say, okay, this pipeline is going to run a daily basis in my dev environment, and then it's going to run weekly in QA, and it's going to run every Friday morning in production to process my data model. So we are going to start talking about the app registration. Why we need to create an app registration? Because what we are going to bring here, I don't want the whole process to run under my name. I don't want to process the data model in Azure Analysis Services with the name Gaston Cruz. I would love to use a service account. That's why the app registration is really important, because we are going to create a service account. This is the app registration name in some block and topics, you can see the service principal instead of app registration. So we are going to create a new app registration, and within that app registration, we are going to delegate permissions to Azure Analysis Services to process our data models. So the app registration itself is gonna read and write in every data model that we have in Azure Analysis Services. So we are gonna say, okay, this app, this service principal, this service account is going to have the rights to read and write in any data models that lives in Azure Analysis Services. That being said, let's jump into our Azure Portal again. And in our Azure Portal here, we can see that if we look here in the Azure Portal search, you can start writing app registration, and you can see that there's an option for the service itself there. And if we click in that option, I already have one app registration under my name, but you can go here and just click new registration, and you can just give a name of that app registration. Then you can set it if you want that app registration only in your tenant, or you're going to use that in multi-tenant. And if you need a redirect URI, in this case, I'm not using any kind of authentication for URL, because I'm not using this app registration to log in any web application. I'm using against the service of Azure Analysis Service. So that being said, if I go to my logic app, my app registration here, the name itself, I give the name logic app access. That is my name of the app registration. You can do whatever you want in terms of creating your names, but couple of things that they are really important when you create your app registration is to take the notes, and I strongly recommend to go to Notepad and copy and paste these values, because you are going to need those values in this process. Couple of values that you are going to need in this process. First of all, what the name is application ID. The client ID or the application ID is really important for each app registration. You will need this string here. Then the other important thing that you need to take notes about this process is the tenant ID. This one, the directory tenant ID, this one is really important that you take the notes and go to the Notepad and copy and paste those two values. Then the next step that we saw in our PowerPoint deck is the API permissions at the left of the screen. And you can see here that I already delegate those permissions. You can see that in my Azure Analysis Services instance, I gave this app registration the rights to model, read, and write in every Azure Analysis Services instance. So how I did that, I just, Yeah, I can do that actually. Yeah. Yep. No worries. Let's do this. Much better now? Great. So how I did this in terms of how I delegate the permissions to the Azure Analysis Services, I came here with add permissions. Then I just start writing here, Azure Analysis Services, searching for the service. Of course, you need to have, first of all, an Azure Analysis Services there. And then I click in the service itself, and then you can see that I can check this option and this checkbox here that allow me to say, and let's recap here. What we are doing here is we are saying, okay, this service account, this app registration is going to read, it's going to have the rights to read and write in every Azure Analysis model. So that's where we came here to say, okay, this Azure Analysis Services instance is going to allow this app registration to read and write in each data model that we have. And you can see here this URL here. This is the URL to access the REST API. This is really kind of important because we are going to use this URL because we are going to use the REST API of Azure Analysis Service. So then, the next step in our process. In our process, we are going to create a new key, and this is exactly in the same window in the app registration itself. This is going to allow us to create a key because we don't want anyone to create or write in any of our data models. So that's why we are going to create an encrypt key, and that encryption key is going to allow us to embed that key in our app registration or the service principal. So how I can create this key and how I gonna see this window here. Let's go back again to the app registration. And this is the main window of the app registration. And actually what I'm doing here is going to certificates and secrets at the left. And what I'm doing here, I already create a couple of new client secrets, but if I want to do again, I can set here create a new key, and I can say, okay, I allow this key to expire in 1 year, 2 years, or never expire. So I am adding a new key, and that key is another thing that I need to copy and paste to my clipboard and send to Notepad. So recapping here, we said that it's really important to go and copy your application ID in the app registration, copy your tenant ID, and then copy this key ID because you need those three information or data in the following steps on this process. So next step for us, we mentioned this, we need to take care about application ID, tenant ID, and then you can see here our next step. Our next step is going to be, okay, let's go to our Azure Analysis Service instance, and let's say that the app registration needs to access as an admin in that Azure Analysis Service instance. So I need to jump into SQL Management Studio, again, here, and we need to go with this data model. In this case, I have my BACD data model, but I have to go to the root of the Azure Analysis Services here, right-click, go to Properties, and in Security, I need to do this. What is this? This is the app registration ID that it says that I am allowing this app registration to go to my server and refresh my data model. How I create this, if you go to the settings here, you can see in my PowerPoint slide here that the way I create this user is with this environment here. I am using app first, then the application ID, the ampersand, and then the tenant ID. I'm going to show you how I create this. What I'm saying is go to my Notepad, and I am saying, okay, this is going to be the user. It's going to be app, 2 dots, and then I'm going to jump into my logic apps here, copy my application ID from here, and go to my Notepad again, and paste that, the application ID, the ampersand, and then the tenant ID. And this is the way I create that user. And I'm going to copy that user that I create and go back again to my SQL Management Studio, right-click, Properties, go to Security, add the new user, go to Manual Entry. Here, I'm just logging. In the Manual Entry is where I paste that code. So I am pasting the whole user into this window, and I recap here. What I'm saying here is this user that is my app registration, the service principal, is going to be an admin of my Azure Analysis Service instance, because that service account is going to allow me to process automatically every data model that I have here in the analysis service. So going back again to my deck here, I have my app registration first. I complete my application ID, my tenant ID, I create my key, then I bring that user to my Azure Analysis Services in SQL Management Studio as an administrator, and then I'm going to implement a logic app that allow me to process the model directly and automatically directly in the logic apps itself. So how I going to do that? I'm going to go back to my Azure instance here. Let's go to my logic apps here. You can search in the resource for logic apps if you want here, and you can see that there's a logic apps here, and we can create. I have my already created logic apps, but you can add here. It's kind of really simple and basic steps to create your logic apps. You can define your subscription, your resource group, the name of your logic apps, what is going to be your region of that logic apps, if you want log analytics or not, but then you can just directly create logic apps. And let's see my logic apps here, and let's go to the design of the logic apps. Because if you see the design of the logic app here, you can see that there's only one action here, because this is the trigger of the logic apps. This is going to be the trigger that every time a HTTP request is received, this is the connection to the REST API of Azure Analysis Services. But there's only one action here, and we can create the action directly from the new step, and you can see that it's really easy to search for that action. And everyone that came from the Power Automate or Flow world, or even from the development world here, you can just see that there's a bunch of connectors in every logic apps. And you can see that every time I start looking for an action, you can search for that action, and you can see that that action is coming directly here, and you can complete all that you need to trigger that action in your logic apps. In my case and in my scenario, if you see my logic app here, I create only an action that is an HTTP action here, and I define the method of that action to post an HTTP request. And you can see that in the post method here, I just create a URL here. And we are going to discuss about this URL, because actually this URL is a dynamic URL, and that depends on the project and the solution that you're working on. If you see the whole URL here, there's a couple of things that I want to mention in this URL. And let's go back to the deck to see something else about this. You can see that in my HTTP action here, there's a post method, and the URL that we are talking right now, I click here in this URL, you can see actually the whole access to the REST API. This is the whole documentation to access the REST API. And if you see here in the first 3 paragraph here, you can see that that URL is coming with, first of all, this is the region of my Azure Analysis Services. Then this is static, and this is the name of the REST API that we are calling. Then slash and the servers that we have. And then it's going to be the name of my server of Azure Analysis Services. Then we have a slash and the models that we have. And then actually this is the data model that we want to process. So the whole URL here is coming directly based on the region, based on the name of my server or instance of Azure Analysis Services, and then the database that we need to process. So if you see here, the whole URL is saying, okay, this is the region, this is a static URL, this is the name of my server in this case, then the name of my data model, in this case is AdventureWorks, and then the action that I'm gonna trigger with the logic apps. And I'm trigger the refresh of my data model. If we came back to my Azure Portal, you can see exactly what's going on here. This is my region. I am using West US 2 for my Azure Analysis Services. Then we say that this is static here. Then we have the servers, and this is the name. Analytics server is the name of my instance. Then we have models as a static, and this is the name of my data model. I can switch for the new one. I can say, okay, in this one is going to be BACD instead of the other one. And then refreshes is because I am going to use this action to refresh the data model. Then in the body here, we can say that this body here, we can copy and paste that body directly from the REST API here. And you can see that there's a bunch of examples or samples here where you can say, okay, I want a full processing of the data model. I want to see this transactional with 2 parallelisms, retry count 2, and the objects that I want to refresh. This is kind of a basic stuff on how we are going to process the data model. But actually, in this object here, you can see that you can define, okay, I want to process only one table, only one partition, or the whole database. So you will have here different examples. In this case, you can see different examples of different ways you can call your REST API to refresh your data model. In my case, if we go here again, we can see that I am calling and processing only one partition in the sales LT address table, and then I am processing the whole table of customer and the whole table of product. You can combine and do whatever you want. You can process the whole database, just a couple of partitions. You can start working with variables to do this more dynamically and try to reprocess only what you really need in each trigger of your logic apps. So there's a lot of things that you can do actually within this code of the body of your logic apps. Then what you need to do here in this window is set up the authentication type. And again, you will need what we get from the app registration. If you see here, we are using the Active Directory OAuth, and then we are copy and paste the tenant ID from the app registration. We are going to copy the audience again from the same app registration. We are going to copy client ID from the app registration itself. So let's see here. You can see that this is the app registration. You have the application ID, you have the tenant ID, you have everything what you need directly from here to complete all that stuff here in the logic apps from the Azure Portal. And then you have the credential type secret, and this is the key that we create in the app registration. So everything came here directly from the app registration in this authentication space in the HTTP action. Then we can say that everything is working right now. So you can actually, if we go to my deck here, how I can see these HTTP requests, because we can go there and just in my Azure portal, I can test that this logic app is working and is triggering the process of my model. So I can run from here. And when I run here, this is working directly against my data model. And I can go in my data model. In my case, I was using this data model here. So I can go to my data model and I can see that I am processing this partition and this table here. So if I go to sales LT product and let's go to my management studio here, let's go to my server here and let's refresh this window and let's go to the data model that we are processing here, go to tables, go to product, right click on properties, and we can see that the last refresh was, in my case, I am in Pacific time right now. My daytime right now is 7:43 p.m. So 1 minute before we trigger the logic apps and just trigger to process the product table. What is going on here? We are processing the sales LT product. So that trigger is getting all the latest information from the Azure SQL database. So if someone hit my Azure Analysis Service, it's going to get the latest information in my product table. So I am processing the product table, the customer table, the address table to get the latest information. I can even process the whole data model if I need to. So that allow me to go to my logic app here. And if I see my logic app again, and if I go to my logic app designer again in my Azure portal, you can see in the logic app designer that after the first run, I can click in this option of the HTTP request is received, and I can see this URL here. What is going on with this URL? It's getting the URL that I need to trigger the logic apps from different services. So if I need to trigger the logic apps from different services, I'm going to need this URL here. So that being said, I'm going to jump into my deck, and then we are going to implement an Azure Data Factory instance that allows to trigger automatically the logic apps process. So Azure Data Factory in different scenarios allow us to create different pipelines to transform information, to create data flows, to create different kind of construction actions and objects to transform the data from different sources. In this scenario, what we are going to do here is go to my Azure portal. I have my Azure Data Factory. You can, of course, as we did before, you can go here and search for Azure Data Factory, and you can see here Data Factories, and you can create your instance of Azure Data Factory. But then after you create the instance of Azure Data Factory, in this case, this is my instance of Azure Data Factory, you will have this option here to author and monitor Data Factory. And when I hit this option here, it's going to open a new window that allow me to see this homepage here, where I can see that Azure Data Factory allow me to create pipelines, data flows, use templates, copy data from different sources, even run SQL integration services package here. And the most important thing for me is you can even set up a code repository and link your Azure Data Factory with an Azure DevOps environment. So if I go here to author option, I can create a pipeline, and you can see that I have 3 or 4 different pipelines here. One of them is the refresh model pipeline here. And what I'm saying here is, in this case, I am not using the whole power of Azure Data Factory. I'm just using one object, and this object is just a web action here. And you can search for that activity here, just clicking and writing web, and you can see that there's web action, and you can just drag and drop. Yeah, you can drag and drop that object directly from the pipeline, and you can copy here, and then you need to configure this web action. And I'm gonna delete this because I already have this web action here. And you can see in the properties, when I click here, I change the name to the refresh web Azure Analytics Services. And then you can see that in my settings here, I'm gonna configure that web action. And what is my URL that I'm using here? I am just copy and paste the URL that I get from the Logic app. So I am getting at the top of my window here, in the top of my window here, I can go and copy from my Logic apps this HTTP request, and I'm copying this URL and pasting that directly in my pipeline, in my web action of my pipeline in Azure Data Factory. Then you can see that the method is post because I'm posting this method to the Logic apps, and then I just copy and paste a body here to say hello world for this body of my pipeline web action. And from here, I am saying, okay, let's go, and via this web action, I'm gonna trigger the Logic apps from here to say, okay, let's go and process that data model. Let's process those tables in the data model. And you can run directly from here, from the debug option, on the other option that you have. And that's why I came here to Azure Data Factory, because I would love to go here and use this option here in the top right. I'm gonna create a trigger. In this case, I'm gonna edit one that I have, and I can see that in the trigger option here, I can define a schedule for that trigger. So I'm gonna say, okay, if we want to refresh our data model every day at 7 a.m., I can say, okay, I want to create a new trigger, start in this date, and I want to set up this process running every 30 minutes, every 1 hour, every day. If you say every day, you can even define what is the UTC time that you need to refresh your data model or trigger the Logic apps. So you can define any kind of trigger to run this web action. And remember, that web action is just calling the Logic apps recursively every 1 day or every 1 hour. If you want to test this running directly from here and manually, you can just debug from here. And in the debug option here, you can see that it's running, and you can see and monitor the web activity that's calling directly your Logic apps. And when we start this process, we can see that this process is running against the Logic apps, is calling the Logic apps, and the Logic apps is processing our data model. So right now in my daytime zone, I have 7:50 p.m. I can go again to my SQL Management Studio again, and let's see the following. Let's go to my customer table. That's one of the tables that I process with the Logic apps, and let's say right-click, properties, and we can see the last refresh today at 7:50 p.m. That was 1 minute ago. That was the trigger that we came and we defined directly from the Azure Data Factory. So let's recap here. Our Azure Data Factory right now instance is calling the Logic apps. If we want to set up a trigger there, we can set up a trigger to do this daily basis. And that Azure Data Factory is calling the logic apps, and the logic app is going to process, in this case, 1 partitions and 2 tables in our data model, could be even all the database data model. So from now on, every time someone hits the Azure Analysis Services from Power BI Desktop, they are going to receive the latest information coming for that data model, even if they have multiple data sources. So that being said, that is the pipeline process that we did in Azure Data Factory. This is how we can create a trigger. We have 2 options to create triggers in the same Azure Data Factory instance and to define the recurrence of that trigger itself. Even if we want to set up an end date, we can do that directly in the trigger. And that's gonna be all from my end. I love to talk about real case experience from my end and how we are doing things in enterprise data modeling from now using kind of bunch of services in Azure. Not only Azure Analysis Services in the semantic layer, we use logic apps, data factory, service principal, different solutions that we have right now to process our data model. I hope that this session was kind of good for anyone and clarify.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gaston. We didn't get many audience questions, but you know, that's too bad. Just too bad for them because I have some questions of my own.
Okay.
One of them being, what got you started with logic apps in the first place?
In my case, my story is kind of tricky in the logic apps world because I started with Power Automate first, before was Microsoft Flow. And you know, kind of the tricky thing is that that allowed me to understand the whole process of logic apps, because behind the scenes logic apps is kind of the same for me in the logic of how we trigger and automate process and business workflows behind the scenes. So my advice here is start from basic and baby steps. Let's say that you want to define a workflow to automate email alert. You can do that with logic apps.
Right, very cool. Do you have, and this is your moment to do a shameless plug, do you have any things coming up, content, like maybe event-wise, speaking at another event about these topics that you want to plug? Now is your time.
Yeah, you know, I've been jumping into right now that with the context is kind of crazy for everyone worldwide. I've been jumping into different conference and talkings, and you know, the next wave for me is gonna be SQL Saturday in Auckland, talking with Resorat, with Leila Etati, and most masterful minds there. But right now, in my personal case, I've been jumping into a crazy idea that we have with a couple of friends from Latin America, Spanish friends. But right now, it's kind of, we are running really, really fast in terms of we are creating, the name was Azure in the Bar. And it's kind of small talks between folks about technology, experience, projects, good experiences, bad experiences, obstacle, sharing kind of different knowledge. And we have a session the next August 11 is going to be Tuesday, that we are going to interview Scott Hanselman in that Azure in the pub or Azure in the bar.
It's kind of really nice. I love the title. At least.
And you know, it's kind of informal talks. How you jump into your IT world? What was your first experience? What kind of problems did you have in that process? What was your best project? What was your worst project ever? This kind of small talk. Again, thanks again to having me here.
Yeah, and both events sound really wonderful. Maybe you can jump in the chat on Azure.Community and share the links for both of those events so people can check those out as well, if it's somewhat in their time zone, right?
I'm gonna do that.
JT, are you going to introduce us into the
Awesome.
break?
I might as well. I need to do something here. You're all doing such a great job and I'm doing not very much. So without further ado, let's jump into a break and then we will be back in just a moment with our next speaker.
Awesome. Thanks.
大家好
Kamusta?
Servus.
Hi.
Hi.
Bonjour
Jasas.
Hi
Hoi. Ik ben
I'm
Floor.
Ryan Strobeck from Austria.
日本からこんにちは。私は桑高由紀です。